Hi again and welcome back to this fifth in the series of videos, A Beginner's Guide to Music Direction in Musical Theatre. So far we've looked at your role as the music director, knowing what is expected of you, choosing some productions, some basic conducting technique, the audition process and leading music rehearsals. If you've missed any of those, well, where have you been? Subscribe by hitting the button below to link to the course so far and be informed when further videos are going to be released. Today we're going to be looking at the initial production meeting. What needs to be decided early in the rehearsal process and working with your production colleagues through rehearsals and what you need to be aware of on the way. Continue to ask me any questions in the comments box below. I want to hear from you and your experiences. I'm currently planning videos on working with bands when they are not in an orchestra pit, dealing with the problems when the band is on stage or in the scenery dock or away from the performance area, and the problems that can cause. Also, I'm looking at videos on working with click tracks. Maybe there's something specific you want me to cover. If so, let me know. Okay, let's make a start then with the initial production meeting. Now, I always put a lot of emphasis on having an early production meeting. But what do I mean by production meeting? Well, it's the meeting where the director will outline his or her vision and ideas for the production as a whole. It's important, I feel, that all the production team has some form of input into this meeting. It's the opportunity for all involved in how the final production will look and sound to discuss ideas and visions, and will give all those responsible to have a clear overview as to what is to be achieved and what you're all aiming for. It's also at this meeting where you as the music director can ensure that all of your musical requirements for the production are considered and agreed. So let's go through some of the questions and ideas you may wish to have answered or clarified at such a meeting. We mentioned in a previous video whether or not a recording specifically of dance music would be required. This would be an opportunity to agree on what music needs to be pre-recorded. Where is the band or orchestra to be located? Now, this may sound a silly question, but not all bands and orchestras are located in the theatre's pit. Indeed, not all theatres and venues have such a facility. On occasion, it may be preferable to include the band as part of the overall performance and have the band located actually on the stage. This can naturally have its own problems and pitfalls, which we'll look into in more detail in another video. Sometimes, due to the limited space available in some venues, the band or orchestra may be located at the side of the stage in the scenery dock, or indeed in a separate part of the venue altogether. If any of this is being considered by the director, it is at this point when such matters need to be discussed and agreed, so that right from the onset, you can start to plan accordingly. I was once involved in a production where the director had decided a walkout from the stage around the orchestra location was required, but hadn't taken into consideration the number of musicians that needed to be accommodated within the area he had allocated. The director may be considering some changes to the production that either reduce the amount of scene changes or indeed to add a further level of complexity to any existing scene changes. Any ideas such as these may require additional or extended music to cover. Be prepared. In some rehearsal locations, it may be possible to run some rehearsals side by side in another rehearsal space. If it is possible for a company rehearsal to take place at the same time as you, the music director, could possibly work with a soloist, it's something you need to be aware of. We will talk about rehearsal planning shortly, but it's worth confirming who is going to be responsible for putting such a plan together. It usually is the director. Directors sometimes like to incorporate any written overture in a musical as part of the performance and action on stage. As such, This is something that needs to be planned for in as far as it may be music that needs to be pre-recorded for rehearsal purposes. I think there's nothing that looks more unprepared from an actor's point of view if, when attending a rehearsal, those in charge then decide what they're going to do and who's going to be taking that rehearsal. The rehearsal plan will dictate who will be required and who will be needed to take each rehearsal to avoid any confusion. Different groups and different directors can work in very different ways when it comes to the rehearsal process. As mentioned in another video, some groups may only employ a director for the latter stages of the rehearsal, and until that point, music and choreography rehearsals have been taking place. When that hasn't been the case, I personally like to teach a musical number and then have the director or choreographer start to block the number on the floor. This has two advantages. Firstly, it keeps rehearsals interesting and varied for members, and secondly, it can aid the learning process. Learning a musical number is all well and good, but if some time has passed before it is staged, some of this learning could have been in vain. For those members who find it difficult to learn lyrics, and I include myself in this, being able to relate the words I am singing to where I am on stage and what my feet may be doing can help enormously in the process of learning. It's always useful to know when the production is to start to move into the venue, and these dates are usually decided way in advance. Dates and location for the band call also need to be agreed and confirmed as soon as this is viable. On many occasions, the band or orchestra may not have access to the performance space for the rehearsal, and some other location may need to be arranged. Dates for technical and dress rehearsals are also usually confirmed way in advance. It is at this meeting where consideration and any discussion on production numbers and therefore chorus adaptations may also be discussed. What do I mean by chorus adaptations? It need not always be the case that when in the musical score it states all or chorus or all men or all women. That needs to be how the number should be performed. It may be the case that the production number would benefit from smaller sections being performed by a smaller group and later in the stages of the number, the full company. There would be nothing worse than teaching your full company a production number only to find out that the director had planned only to use a proportion of the assembled members. So always check whether the director is considering deviating from what is written. Having a detailed rehearsal schedule ensures everyone knows when they are required and what to expect at any particular rehearsal. I mentioned earlier that sometimes the blocking of numbers may take place much later on in the rehearsal schedule, but if this is not the case and it's possible to learn a musical number and then start blocking it, which aids learning no end, this would be part of the rehearsal plan. Aim to vary the numbers during any music-only rehearsals. Remember that dead horse we want to avoid flogging? Spending a disproportionate amount of time on any one particular passage or number will considerably reduce the learning capacity of your assembled singers. Be prepared to revise any rehearsal schedule as often as is required, because it will go out of date as the weeks pass by, either because of absenteeism or because your company is simply fully engaged in your rehearsals and learning their musical numbers way beyond your expectations. Yeah. Also, don't forget to include your principal actors in any rehearsal plan so they know when they're required. So we are now well into our rehearsal process, and so far things are going well. If you have a good working relationship with your colleagues in the production team, it's worth sharing all kinds of production ideas. It needn't be the case that the director has to decide on everything and the choreographer decides on all matters of movement. Similarly, they may have an idea that you may wish to adopt from a musical point of view. Don't be defensive if this happens. It shows you're working collectively and effectively. As rehearsals progress, there are certain things that the music director should be mindful of. If a great amount of work has taken place to get a good harmonic sounding number together from your company, look out for your singers being split on stage if you feel this would detract from the overall sound you've created during rehearsals. Directors and choreographers aren't necessarily aware when they place members on stage on matters relating to splitting the altos, for instance. But if your company is well rehearsed in their singing parts, this won't be a problem. In a similar vein, if there are any musical passages that rely solely on you as the music director or conductor to cue those on stage, watch out for any singers being placed where they can't see you, and perhaps respectfully remind the director or choreographer accordingly. Always, always take time to recap. All the work spent on teaching a company number can easily be lost if that number is then not worked on again for another 6 weeks or so. Therefore, ensure you don't leave any musical number too long before recapping. As rehearsals advance, make notes and feedback those notes accordingly at the start of the following rehearsal. Giving notes at the end of a rehearsal when everyone is somewhat exhausted rarely has the same impact. Try to link together what has been learned so far as soon as possible. I'll refer to these as run-throughs. Many years ago, as a member of a company in the chorus, rehearsal after rehearsal we had been putting together this particular musical production. But it wasn't until all the various elements of the production started to be put together, i.e. a run-through, before I, as the inexperienced chorus member, was able to get any sense of how these elements would link together. I soon realised that what I needed was a sense of continuity. Knowing what order the various elements of this musical I had learned is another level of learning that needs to take place with your company. And if this is left too long, it can have a detrimental effect on how well the production flows. I would advise that trying to run passages already learned and blocked as soon as possible is beneficial. Then, as the run-throughs progress, fix what needs fixing as you go and then move on. Even if only half the production may have been blocked, it is still worth a run-through to help continuity. It's also at this stage useful to include and rehearse any underscoring passages. Actors are sometimes unaware that a passage of dialogue may be underscored, and such dialogues needs to be rehearsed and timed. As time goes by, you will get a sense of how complex or otherwise any scene change is likely to be. This in turn will give you a sense of how much music may be required. In essence, the more run-throughs, the better. And as run-throughs become more advanced, the company as a whole will become aware of when scene change music is to take place. It all adds to a sense of learning continuity. So that brings us finally to the end of part 5. Apologies, there was a lot of information to squeeze into that video. We now get into the end of the rehearsal period and hopefully heading towards the theatre or venue. If any of this is making sense and you think someone you know may find what I'm saying useful, hit the share button. In the next video, we're going to look at the technical rehearsal, the dress rehearsal, and finally, the performance itself, and what can and sometimes does go wrong, and of course, how to fix it. I hope you'll join me then. See you next time.